Welcome to the PA is In, the show created by PAs for PAs, where codependency with your supervising physician is a thing of the past, optimal team practice is the future, and physician associate has taken the place of physician assistant as the professional title of choice. I'm Tracy Bingaman, and I'm obsessed with redefining what success as a PA looks like and what it feels like. Here you'll find the mindset shifts, systems, and processes I use to escape healthcare burnout and integrate my work into my life. Work-life balance is a myth, and an integrated life where you thrive professionally, not a balancing act, is the goal here. My mission is to help you to grow into a unicorn PA who loves their job, has abundant energy, time to spare, and work-optional financial freedom. The PA is in. Have you ever felt like searching for a new job is a part-time job that you simply don't want to handle? That the searching and sourcing and getting your CV and sending it and trying to get through the door for a new position is a huge pain in the butt? And all you want is someone to say, I know what you're good at, and I know someone who's looking for someone in your area that is good at those things. I want you to meet my friend, Madison Loomis. Madison is the head of Advanced Scope recruiting team, and she helps PAs and NPs to get connected with long-term jobs that they are going to love, where they're going to be a great fit. Today, we're going to talk about what a recruiter is and what they aren't, how that is different than working with a recruiter for a specific company, and who needs to work with a recruiter as they're searching for their next job. Without further ado, here she is, Madison Loomis. Madison, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Would you take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yep. So I am Madison. I live outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and I own a small boutique recruitment firm that places NPs and PAs. I have spent the better part of about a decade, both in corporate recruitment, so serving as a recruiter internally with healthcare practices. I also spent some time in the tech scene and also on the staffing side as an external recruiter as well.
So can you tell us, first of all, what the difference between you, the recruiter, is as opposed to the person who works for an organization who's recruiting providers?
Yes, definitely, because I think this is one of the most common misconceptions and can be super confusing if you're starting your job hunt or if you're coming out of school and not knowing who to partner with. So internal recruiters are folks that sit underneath human resources at corporate companies or hospitals. So if you're applying to hospital system, a private practice, they might have somebody that's a recruiter internally. They are overseeing the process, coordinating interviews, and might be also partnering with you through the interview process. But as an external recruiter like myself, we work with multiple different practices and represent different clients. So we might work with 5 different people or 10 different people to introduce you to different opportunities so that you can choose what you feel is best. And we work as an external vendor or partner to these practices. Sometimes we're collaborating with the internal recruiter, and then other times we are driving the whole process, depending on the type of role we're filling or if there is actually that support on the side for the actual client that we're partnering with.
Sure. So this is something that, say you're a new graduate and you're looking for a job. Maybe you're in a new area. Maybe you've never done this whole apply for a real provider position because you're coming out of school and it's your first career. What are some of the benefits of using a recruiter? Why should someone consider partnering with a recruiter as opposed to just randomly applying for jobs on their own?
Yeah, so I could talk about this forever. And I think there's pros and cons to each side. There are a lot of internal recruiters that are great at what they do and they understand what they're recruiting for and they will provide you with a really strong candidate experience. But they are only representing that one company. So when you apply, it's kind of a single transaction, if you will. And a lot of times when you're submitting your resume, it's going into a database and you're just hoping that your application is coming through when they're looking at that database because they could be handling 50 different requisitions at any given point, especially in hospitals. And the chances of them actually taking the time to review your resume might be slim to none. When you're working with an external recruiter, A lot of times you're getting a little bit more of a personalized approach. They're finding out what motivates you, what you're looking for, and they're well connected to multiple different places so that if you tell me, hey, I'm really interested in dermatology, or hey, I'm really interested in orthopedics, they might be connected to specific practices, and they could say, well, let's have you interview with these three people and see which one you like the best. And I'm going to make sure that I'm following up to coordinate interviews, getting proper feedback, and making sure that we're helping to drive the process as kind of that middleman.
Hmm. I have this image in my mind of like, I'm sure that it's not happening with paper resumes, but this is how old I am, that I'm thinking of like, okay, the HR person has this whole stack of CVs on their desk and yours is in the stack, right? So you're in the stack you've applied, as opposed to working with an external recruiter. They're like hand delivering the resume. They're bringing it and they're saying, this is a candidate who's qualified for this position or that position. They've been vetted, that it sort of sets you apart from other applicants. Do you find that that's true for people that you're working with?
100%. I think recruiting and interviewing, there's a saying, and everybody's heard it, of like, it's not about what you know, but who you know. And if you get in with a good recruiter who's well connected, they have relationships built. So even if your experience is shy of what the job description calls for, to where if you had applied through the internal recruiter, they might say, nope, next. But if I'm saying, hey, Tracy, I personally know this person. I've spent the last 2 weeks listening to what they're looking for. I understand their interview experience. They've got great bedside manner. I think they'd be perfect because of X, Y, and Z. It's a more personalized approach, and there's trust already established there to where you're connecting them and you're kind of that piece that's getting them in front of the right people. Because a lot of times, too, recruiters are partnering with higher ups in the organization rather than just maybe, and I don't mean this in a demeaning way, but maybe, a human resources coordinator or specialist who may not truly know what they're vetting when they're even looking at your resume to determine, is this person going to be able to do the job?
Mm, yeah. And I often have people, I work in aesthetics. And so a lot of people will message me and say, hey, how do I get into aesthetics? My background is ER, my background is family medicine, but I'm passionate about this. I'm, a user of these services. I'm interested in these things. And I often say, hey, can you get your foot in the door in terms of shadowing or getting into a local office? But it sounds like that's a great opportunity to say, hey, if you partner with a recruiter, that they can set you aside. Because there's a lot of positions out there. You mentioned dermatology, that they say they want experience, 3 to 5 years of experience. And all these new graduates are saying, well, if no one will hire me without 3 to 5 years of experience, how do I get that years of experience? It sounds like using a recruiter is a great way to do that.
100%. And I think, too, a lot of people shy away from, there's been studies done, and I think there's a huge differential between when a female will apply versus when a male will apply if the job description meets X amount of the qualifications. And so I think it's also kind of allowing you to escape that metric of doubting yourself and your ability to do a job. And I also push on my clients that based on what you need, if you're not needing somebody that's, like we're not hiring a neurosurgery PA that needs to be able to go into the OR tomorrow, you're going to have to train them anyway. So why not train somebody that's coming out of school, and you'll be able to train them the way that you want them to practice rather than having to break maybe potential bad habits, or a style of things that you're just not doing in your practice. So, I mean, there's definitely pros and cons, and it's really just having a personal advocate that the client's taking too long to get back to you. Let me know. I'll kindly nudge them and say, hey, where do we stand with Tracy? Like, she's really excited. She's got other opportunities. I don't want to lose her. So where do we stand? And that helps to also not sound or come across too pushy in the interview process. And it sets the candidate up to start out on a good foot with their collaborating physician or their team, members.
So everyone listening who is a potential candidate for a future job, which is everyone who's practicing clinically, is thinking, Madison, does this cost me something? Like, I'm going to come to you and say, hey, I want to find a position outside Atlanta. I want to work in dermatology with some medical and some aesthetics. Does it cost me something as the provider to work with you?
It does not. So I could also talk about this forever. So back in the old days, it used to be that people would pay you as a headhunter. So a lot of people are familiar with that term. Like my mom's generation, when I tell them what I do, they're like, oh, so a headhunter. I'm like, kind of, sure, yeah. But so it used to be that candidates and a lot of times executive leaders would go out and pay somebody to essentially do the foot traffic, the work of finding them a new role. Nowadays, it's shifted. So the employer will pay a fee. A lot of recruiters work off of a percentage of salary. I work off of a flat fee, which just ensures a lot more trust, I guess, if you will, in the process for the candidate. But you do not have to pay to utilize a recruiter 99% of the time.
Hmm. Awesome. It seems like this is an underutilized resource for clinicians. I think most of us are saying, hey, I want to find a job. I have to go find it. We're not saying I have to go find a good recruiter. So when you're looking for a recruiter, to the person listening who's like, I've been looking for a job, but I haven't been using a recruiter, what are some good characteristics or what are we looking for? Is it someone who's recruiting for ortho? If I'm interested in ortho, is it someone who's recruiting in my area? Are there different types or specialties inside of recruiters that you should be searching for depending on who you are?
Yes, 100%. So I think there's national recruiters, so people that have clients all over that can connect to you, whether you're in DC, California, Ohio, Texas, it doesn't really matter. There's also a lot of recruiters who are specialty specific and or like a few specialties, right? So they might be focused primarily on orthopedics and pain, orthopedics, urgent care pain, things that kind of flow together, if you will, or have natural transitions to one or the other as people's careers move along. But there's also plenty too that are, not specific to a specialty and they're just well connected and they might be able to place you in derm or ortho or neuro or whatever else or primary care. It just depends on what you're looking for. But I would say do your research and just ask the question when you're working with them of like, okay, so what do you specialize in?
Yeah. Is most of this being done virtually? Like, could I have you recruit me for a position in Pennsylvania if you're in Georgia?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, especially if they're national based, then they could have clients all over and they're just really that connecting piece. So, you'll have a conversation with the recruiter first. And then, say I'm recruiting somebody, I would get your CV. I would type up notes to make sure I understood what your motivations are, explain kind of the reasons for why you're wanting that position, to pitch you to the client, and then coordinate those interviews from there. And it can be done 100% remote. There are people that specialize in like they only work a certain geo, but a lot of recruiters nowadays are, nationwide.
Yeah, that's really cool. I feel like the prospect of searching for a job, whether you're a new graduate or you've been somewhere a long time, it's just not a skill set that we leverage very often. So we use it when we are first out of school, if we're in a season of transition, but when we're working somewhere for a period of time, we don't have that network necessarily. We're not leveraging those skills. So for someone to come alongside you and say, "Oh, this is my job," right? Because my job is to take care of patients. So that's what I do on an everyday basis. My job is not to find myself a job, which when you're searching on your own, it sort of becomes your job, right? You're like, this is like a second job. I'm sourcing, I'm recruiting, I'm updating my resume, I'm sending it to them. I'm doing all of these things. It sounds like for the average busy clinician who's seeing patients and has a life outside of work, that this is incredibly beneficial.
Yeah. Well, even just from the administrative tasks of it all, when I talk to somebody, I might say, hey, Tracy, I know this week is hectic for you. So let me know what your availability is, and I'll go ahead and I'll schedule with the client the times that work best for you. And I'll send that over to your calendar so that it's already taken care of. And here's who you're going to be meeting with. Let's jump on a 15-minute call beforehand so I can explain to you their role in the practice and how you can meet with success in this interview. And I think sometimes just having that insight too to better understand what they're looking for and to really make that match, not in an authentic way too, right? Not to try to set people up to be actors or actresses, but just to make sure that they feel well supported, because it is difficult when you do it on your own, especially as a new grad, or maybe you've been enrolled for 10 plus years and you're like, I haven't gone on an interview in forever. So, how do I conduct myself and what questions do I ask to make sure that I'm uncovering all the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's another way that recruiters can really be a support system to you throughout that process.
Finding the perfect gift for everyone on your list, well, it can be quite a challenge. And when you're a busy professional trying to choose thoughtful, high quality, personalized gifts, you know that all too well. Thankfully, there's KML Expressions, a PA mom-owned business that can personalize almost anything. From ornaments to occupation-specific items for PAs and more, Crystal has got you covered. Don't even get me started on how cute her stuff is. Even the hardest people to buy for, there's a gift for them at KML. Head to the link in the show notes to place your order today. Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like you have an inside person in that you have some insight into the practice that the applicant wouldn't necessarily have, that you can share, and say, here's what you can expect. This is what they've told me they're looking for. Not because I want to pretend I'm that person, but rather because that's good information to know when you're walking into an interview. So let's talk about interviewing a little bit. So I like to tell my personal clients that interviewing is sort of like seeing a patient, right? So you're trying to figure out what's going on, what they need, what the problem is, what the solution is. And the same is true for having an interview. What is some of your best advice for how to feel confident, but also to use that interview to make sure it's a good fit for them and a good fit for you?
Yeah. So I think asking questions is key. I think a lot of people, and this has actually as a recruiter been kind of a red flag for me, is if I ask a candidate, like, okay, I've done a lot of talking, I've told you this, that, and whatever else. What questions do you have for me? And a lot of times candidates feel like the best answer to say here is, nope, I think you answered all my questions. And in my mind, I'm going, then you must not be that interested. Because if I was interviewing for this job, I would have a million questions, and maybe I don't ask all of them right here, but which ones can I ask you? And I think you need to tailor those questions specifically to who you're speaking with. What you ask a practice manager is going to be different than what you ask somebody that's a clinician in the practice versus what you ask the physician. So understanding and kind of having those social cues to know when and what to ask as well. But I think the confidence piece is just not being afraid to genuinely ask yourself, like maybe you found out in your last job that you really don't want X, Y, and Z. Well, then ask that when you're having this interview and know what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Maybe write down like what your deal breakers are and where are some things you're willing to deal with. And that's where a recruiter can also tell you, like sometimes they tell people, you're going to see tons of patients. If that's not what you want, this is not the place for you. But if that's not a deal breaker, well, then they might be okay with it as long as it has these other things for them. And I think knowing what you want and not being afraid to voice that is only going to help you in the long run to identify, like, is this for me or is this maybe something that I pass on for now?
Yeah. And I think professionally, we don't do that step enough. So we say, I want a new job. And oftentimes, if you're anything like me, you wait until you cannot stand to stay where you are one moment longer. So then you're looking in a hurry, right? Because you really want to get out of where you are. And the way you can get out is by landing that new job and getting credentialed and getting it lined up so that you can start. But in doing so, you don't take time to say, hey, this job I'm leaving burned me out. What did I like? What didn't I like? What worked well? What would I never do again? Right? What are things I'm looking for? What are things I'm not looking for? And getting really specific with that, I'm sure it makes it easier for you when you have a clinician you're working with. If they say, I don't want to round at the hospital ever. I'm not willing to do inpatient. I'm not willing to do OR. Then you're like, oh, well, this just eliminated half the positions, which sounds bad. To the person listening, you're like, half the positions? Those are positions you didn't want anyway, because you didn't want to do the thing they're going to make you do at that job. So if you can eliminate them, it saves everybody time. It saves that practice time in interviewing you. It saves you time and not worrying about them. So being specific is not bad. It's actually going to help you get what you actually want out of your next position.
And I'd also add too that this is a question you can ask the recruiter. So me personally, when I establish a new client, I go online and the first thing that I do if they say, hey, yes, we're interested or we need help and they reach out is I go and I look at their health grade ratings of the clinicians and providers in their practice. Number one, I may want to make sure that they're patient care focused, because that is what they're there for. But also, I want to look on Glassdoor to see what their ratings are. Like, what are people that are currently working there are saying about this practice? If they're saying the physician is egotistical and does not give PAs and NPs the autonomy or allow them to work at the top of their scope, well, then I don't want to send candidates to that person and it's a waste of my time. And I'm pitching a dead end to somebody that's going to end up hating their job and then is never going to trust me again. So it's also asking the recruiter, like, have you actually done the homework on this client to know that this is a good opportunity? Or is this just an invoice to you? Because 99% of recruiters don't even know what the collaborating physician for this APP is rated, or even, and I think that's key too, because a lot of them just don't care.
Yeah. That's so interesting because I think one of the biggest thing that we stub our toe on as clinicians is, you have an interview where, by the way, everyone is typically on their best behavior, right? So you don't tend to see the actual underbelly of the place when you're there, because they're like, we have a client, we have someone coming in, everyone's going to be on their best behavior. Everyone's going to say how amazing it is to work here. And then you get there and you're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be at all. I feel like using the recruiter is like they're already vetted before you even get there for the interview, before you do the Zoom, before you get in the door. And that's going to help you to not waste time, with practices that aren't going to be a good fit for you.
Or just if you don't want to use a recruiter, like some people are completely against it or they want to DIY first, and that's fine too. Go on LinkedIn, look up the company and look to see how many, like their tenure. Look to see how many PAs or NPs have been there in the last 3 years, because that'll tell you everything you need to know. I would say outside of urgent care, because I feel like a lot of people start out in urgent care and then move to different specialties. But if you're looking in an orthopedic practice and they've had 6 different PAs or NPs in the last 3 years under the same physician, that's a red flag, right? Like something's going on that needs to be addressed before hiring another person. And those are things that I don't think, like you're saying, people wait until the last minute and then they're like, oh, it's a job and they got an offer and it's more money, so let me just do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I always try to ask personally when I'm applying for jobs, and also if I have coaching clients, ask them why they're hiring. Are they hiring for growth? Are they hiring for turnover? Because they will almost always tell you, oh, Sheila was here, but she moved to Florida because her husband got a job. Great, good for Sheila, right? Like that's not a red flag with the practice. If they're like, well, we have 8 open positions because in the last 6 months, just everyone has left one after another for one reason after, like immediately I'm like, no, I don't care how good it seems. It's not, if people are leaving in droves, I do not want to go there and try and fix that practice, right? I want to come somewhere where it's already a good place to work. And, those people stay. I was in a forum the other day and someone said, how are we doing on retention? My practice, oh my gosh, it was so specific. It was like, I work in cardiothoracic surgery and the average tenure of APPs on our team is 10 and a half years. And I thought, this is unheard of. I was like, what are you doing? Right? That's incredible. I don't have a statistic, but I feel very strongly that that is way above the national average for
No, it
retention for CT
is. I
surgery.
think recently I've seen, in just my own experience without using like actual statistical data, of like just when I talk to folks, early career, it's usually at the 1.5 year mark, because then they feel like from a resume standpoint, they've reached like I stayed for, 15 months. I'm good. And then in later careers, usually it's like 3, maybe 4, right? Is what you typically see. That's when I'm usually like, okay, they're probably open to a conversation. Um, when you see somebody's been somewhere for 15 years, I'm like, they're going to stay there. Unless they're getting into a director role, like they're there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that speaks to the culture. I think that speaks to the autonomy, right? If those are people, if you want to work somewhere and you see people that are reflective of the kind of provider that you want to be, that have gone there and stayed there a long time. That means those people are happy, they're growing, they're being treated with respect, they're probably being compensated well. Like there's a lot of different reasons that people stay in positions, but if a lot of people stay somewhere a long time, that should get your attention in a good way. Like that's a green flag. I feel like we're not talking enough about like what are good signs. So on that topic, what are some things like say someone's not going to work with a recruiter and they're going to do like I'm DIY searching for a new job. What are some things that you have found are like good signs, good things to see or hear or ask and good answers to get for those questions?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that a lot of people probably don't even pay mind to, I don't know, is when you're going on site and you're interviewing with somebody and you walk into the office and you see the plaque. If APPs and PAs are not on there, or PAs and NPs are not on there, and it's just the physicians, and you are going back and 9 out of their 10 patients, if not all 10 patients, are seeing the NP or the PA, I would think that that's probably at a high level how they view APPs. Not always, right? It could just be like they've had that plaque forever and they haven't updated it, and there's 2 docs on there that don't even work there anymore, you know? But also, I think asking just the simple question of like, tell me about the best PA or the best NP on your team. And just listen to their response, listen to their tone, listen to their body language. Now, of course, this is when you're talking to a collaborating physician. I would ask this because no matter where you go, you want to feel like you have a team that values your role in the healthcare ecosystem. And you don't want to feel like you're starting out with just this natural like block, right? Or like having to be in defense mode or constantly having to like show them, hey, I can do a lot more, you know, or hey, like I actually don't need that much supervision over these very simple things I know how to do. And I think just being open-ended and transparent of like asking questions and asking as many as you need to feel like you're uncovering anything that is a hard stop. So some of those things might be, you know, at the end of the year, like how do you celebrate the wins? How do you handle the challenges? Like if somebody's underperforming, what's done? Is there a bonus associated with RVUs? And if so, you know, what is that metric? What are you measuring on? Are you looking at patient satisfaction rates, or are you doing any type of survey engagement type of thing with patients? And really truly understanding from a cultural level how they like big picture view the whole team and then your part on it. And I think so many times we just focus on like meeting the job description bullet points. And it's like, oh, they want me, they're interested. Okay, great. And it's like, but does that work for you long term? Or is it going to be another year and a half on your resume to where you feel like I'm unhappy again, or I'm burnt out, or whatever that might look like?
Sure. The other thing I have found very interesting, I think both as a patient that I have observed, but also in sort of credentialing potential workplaces, is how the front desk or the checkout people speak about their advanced practice providers. So are they saying to that person who's checking out, that's seeing a physician, oh, he's booked out, but like, I guess we could have you see the PA, right? Like she's here every day, so she could see you. You know, that is not a team that really gets it. And to get it, because that's what the patient hears. The patient hears like, oh, second best provider, right? Like not good, like only available because she doesn't, yes, like not qualified. They're not credentialing that person on the phone or when they're checking someone out. And you think, well, that front desk person doesn't get it, right? Because sometimes I've had that happen to me as a patient where they're like, oh, you can't see this person, but like you could see this other person. And I'm like, oh, I'm a PA, so I love seeing PAs. I think they're incredible. Like I'm like probably educating the front desk at my like rheumatologist like about why they're so great. Like I'm like they're highly qualified, they're exceptionally trained. Like I'm like doing like the PR for the profession.
Even I think too, as the PA profession grows. And I think NPs is probably I think people don't understand the difference between an NP, a nurse practitioner, and a registered nurse. If you're outside of healthcare, they're like, okay, a nurse, but for PAs, I think there's a lot more confusion around it, around what they do. And so I was doing business development, and I called this practice, and the receptionist answered, and I said, hi, I saw that you guys are hiring a PA. I wanted to see if I could talk to somebody about that. I think I have a candidate you could really take a look at. And they said, a PA? Do you mean like a medical assistant? And I was like, no, a physician assistant, like a physician associate. I said, do you know what that is? Because you posted for it on Indeed. And she was like, I'm going to have to check with the doctor on that. And I really said, you know what? It's fine. It's totally fine. I'm all set. Thank you. Because why would I then turn around, create a contract with this practice that doesn't even educate the people answering the phone for a job posting that they posted what a PA is? Like, it's just bonkers to me. But that is a lot of what we're dealing with. And I think it's your job to also educate people when there is that lack thereof. But I also think working with a recruiter or doing it yourself, like, just ask those questions.
You might not know this about me, but one of my most despised tasks as a clinician is charting. That's why I'm always searching for hacks, tools, and tactics to make charting more accurate, efficient, and less of a huge pain in the butt. If you too want to spend more time connecting with your patients and less time pointing, clicking, and typing into their chart, you should definitely check out Freed AI. Freed AI is a medical scribe on a mission to free clinicians everywhere from the purgatory that is writing notes. Freed AI listens, transcribes, and writes your medical documentation for you. You can even use the code PA50 for $50 off your first month with Freed AI. These notes are written in your style and done for you by the end of the visit. Can you imagine what it would feel like to leave work on time, notes done, without having to crack your laptop open in the evening? Freed is HIPAA compliant, completely secure, and it takes less than 30 seconds to learn. Get back to what you love doing, treating your patients, and let Freed AI do the rest. Absolutely. And I love what you said earlier about how do we measure success in this position. That is something that feels a little corporate to me. Like, that's a phrase that early on in my career, I never would have thought to ask, right? I was just like, I'm going to come, I'm going to see patients, they're going to get better, I'm going to leave, you're going to pay me money, right? I never thought, like, how are we going to measure success? And the reason that I love this question is because it helps them to say, like, oh, well, maybe you're the first APP they've ever hired, or maybe this doc has never had an AP on their team. And you're like, hey, how do I know if I'm winning here? Like, how do we know if it's going well? Is it based solely on that one person's opinion, or is it based on revenue or productivity? And how is that measured? And do I get credit for the actual work that I'm doing? Because if it's in a surgical practice, a lot of times surgical PAs do a whole lot of pre and post-op global that doesn't strictly generate revenue, but should get credit for the amount of revenue that they are taking off of that surgeon's plate or making that surgeon more profitable because they have more time to do revenue generating work. So has the practice thought of that? How are we evaluating that? And the second part, I love that question, is then when they say, oh, we're going to measure this and that, and, let's say they're organized and they know, then you say, great. How is my bonus built off of those metrics, right? Because it leads you into saying, hey, if we're going to measure success, I'd like to be thanked in dollars, not just pats on the back, right? I would like to be thanked.
I don't want to slice your pizza. Thank you. Yeah.
Like, if we're going to say I'm winning, it matters,
Yeah. And I've had clients too where, I touch base with them and they're like, oh, and this is mainly, clinic-based work. And they say, oh, well, they're not performing at the level we want them to. We're not seeing as many patients as we need to be able to look at it from a profit standpoint, right? And my follow-up question is always like, well, how are you motivating or incentivizing them to hit that standard?
We told them they should.
If you're just telling them, well, you need to see 45 patients. Okay, what if I don't, or what if I do? And how is that then breaking down to, if I see 45 patients, I'm getting paid out this amount? And I remember I just said, well, maybe if you did I said, did you ever implement a bonus structure? No. Well, maybe if you did, you might see that they're going to be motivated to see more patients. And I don't think it's anybody's fault, because I think it's a model that a lot of places are now implementing that always hasn't been the case. I think since PAs and NPs have started to advocate more for themselves, they're starting to say, hey, wait a minute, like, I'm doing all the grunt work essentially in the clinic and not getting paid anything on it, and, making your pockets richer. And so I love to see that places are having to think about that and then question, well, how do we motivate them? And it's like, money.
Pay me more, give me lifestyle benefits, make my life better. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that recipe of you work salary, your expectations will continue to grow over time, but we're not going to pay you more, right? We're just going to say, oh, the demands of the practice has changed, which is my least favorite phrase to hear as a clinician. The demands of the practice has changed, the needs of the practice have changed, and we need you to do X, Y, Z. As a clinician, your next question should be, what are you taking off my plate, and how are you paying me for this extra work? Like, that should just be how it goes. It should just be the first thing that you're asking. We are very used to saying, okay, and then we go home and complain, and then we come in and feel resentful because we're working harder, we're staying later, we're seeing more patients than ever, but we're still making the same amount of money. It's so frustrating.
And I think too, a lot of people just deal with it and they're like, oh, but that's, I'm burnout, so I'm just going to go do something else. And they never have that hard conversation first to say, well, wait a second, like, maybe if I do go to bat for myself because I do such a good job, that they will honor that. Or like, I know in your case, like, you showed them, hey, I know this isn't in place, but here's how you can do it, right? And not only are you going to see your retention increase, you're going to see your attrition decrease. You're going to see your ROI on each clinician that you hire. So your cost per hire is going to go down. I mean, all these things long term, when you look at it from a long game standpoint, are good, but it's going to require some money up front. And you look at any type of other job where it's based on performance, your pay. I look at recruiting. When you fill a position, the more that you fill, the more money you make. That's that, right? Like, every other sales role, when you produce more, you are paid on it. And it's like, why healthcare hasn't adapted to that to be able to fix their retention strategy is beyond me. I guess in some settings it's more difficult than others to measure, but I do appreciate that there's more talk about it happening in recent
I think
years.
in the last 10 years, the tides are changing where clinicians are saying, hey, wait a minute, where we're sort of waking up to realize we are adding value, right? We sort of knew it all along. And now we're like, wait, I know I'm adding value. I want to be paid for the value that I'm adding. And to the person who is like, I'm doubtful that they'll pay me more, they're paying someone like Madison to fill your position if you leave. So let's say like Madison's flat fee is like $20,000, right? And they have to then hire the person, they have to recruit them. There's a period of time where they're not making money because no one's seeing the patients and there's a backlog. That's expensive and inconvenient. So if you go in there and say, I need to make $20,000 more, whether in terms of salary or bonus or whatever, it's cheaper for them to say yes to you, who's already there making money for them. It's so important. We underestimate that all the time. And so we say, I'm just going to get a new job as opposed to making this one work.
Yeah. I would say if money is the only component, or you feel like the money is going to fix the problem, then always have that conversation. But if you're in like a toxic work environment, or you feel like you want money, but you also want it coupled with growth opportunity, there is statistics that show making a jump, you'll make more in that next role, right? But always first see if you can get it out of your place. If everything else, you love the people you work with, there is growth opportunity. Maybe you're just not there yet, but you still feel like you need to be compensated more because you took on X, Y, and Z, or because your clinical skills have come further and you can see more patients per hour because of it. Whatever that factor might be, if everything else is in line, then you just need to have an honest conversation with your boss, because you're 100% correct. Like, it is more expensive to have to backfill than to just increase somebody's salary, because you're not even thinking about the ramp time to train somebody, the credentialing period, all of that, that could take months, right? So if you average the practice X amount in revenue each month, and now you're gone and that role sits empty for 3 months until somebody new starts, like they just lost that amount of money. So, I mean, and that's what I think, just kind of turning on the business side of things rather than thinking just as a clinician, but thinking like behind the curtains. And somebody used this phrase once and I thought it was perfect, is if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And you've got to get to a point with your employer where you can be open and transparent. And if you have that conversation and they don't do anything about it and you truly are performing at that level, then you have your answer. You know what your next step is, but always try that first.
Yeah. And I think people are afraid to do that because then they know, well, if I ask and they say no, then I have to make a change, right? Because if I have realized I'm worth more because of the value that I'm adding to this practice, and I ask them to recognize that in terms of paying me more, and they say no, then I'm like, well, shit. Now I have to go find a job where someone is willing to pay me what I'm worth, which is, if you're relatively comfortable and you like what you're doing, sometimes you're like, oh, now I have to do the thing, right? Now I have to make the change and go do the thing that I said I would do if they didn't pay me more.
Yeah. But I will say, having worked in HR, it benefits you and it doesn't, right? So when a hiring manager, if you are a leader and somebody comes to you and says, I want to get paid more, I feel like I'm underpaid, and then they say no, they know that they've probably got about a month or two until you're out the door. So they're going to go to HR and they're going to say, hey, I think we need to start looking for so-and-so's backfill just as a pipeline. So why doesn't our recruitment team handle this, and we can kind of look at past resumes or see what we can do. But technically, by law, HR can't post that as a replacement requisition unless you have resigned and or already put in a notice or left. So there's some gray area, but I would just say, if that's the case, like if you do give your pitch and you feel like it's justified and they don't honor it, then if it were me, I would go look for a job anyway. So
That's my general strategy also. I'm like, fine, I'll leave because I'm very marketable, right? I could go work anywhere. It's interesting that you say that, because I had this conversation once in my career where I was in a meeting and I asked for this thing and I knew they were going to say no. I just said, hey, what about this? You guys, we're uncovered in this specific time. Can you give us coverage for this? And they said no. And then I walked out and one of my colleagues said, why did you even bother to ask that? You knew they weren't going to cover, you with an MA in this specific instance. And I said, I want them to get used to me asking for things. I want them to get used to me asking for things. That won't be the last time that I'm going to ask for that. I'll ask for it again in 6 months. I'll ask for it again in a year. When we hire someone, I'll ask for that someone to cover this specific need. Like, that need is not going away. So I might as well start asking for it now. So if you ask for a raise and they say no, and then, the other conversation that I might be having after that is they say no because they're not in a position that they can give it to you right now. But sometimes they come back 3 weeks later and say, hey, we heard you, we met, we can't do it till the first of the year, but this is what I can do. First of the year, I can back pay you, I can give you that, but we can work on implementing it now, because that also means that you're like, okay, I'm sort of temporized in this time. I'm not going to be gung-ho actively looking. Maybe you are still putting feelers out there, but you're like, they said they're going to do this. They gave me a timeline for implementation. So then I'm not like, well, they said no, I'm going to leave. It will kind of keep people there a little bit longer.
And I think the squeaky wheel thing of, sometimes if it's not something that is keeping you, and I say this like it's an ask that at the end of the day, you're okay if it goes either way, right? Like something that's not debilitating to your mental health, to your job, to your financial situation, then the squeaky wheel of sometimes they say no and you go, okay, I'll ask again in a couple of months, right? And you stay with them and you're loyal to them through that time frame. And then you ask again and they say, we still can't, and you again stay loyal and continue to do your job. The squeaky wheel of that, when you finally ask for something, they're also going to have a sense of this person, despite us not being able to deliver on these things, has stayed with us and stayed loyal. And so it's going to make them more willing on the bigger asks to help you out if they can provide that to you. And I think that there's something to be said for that too, right? Of like having a little bit of stamina through those hard times, because there's going to be challenging times, right? Healthcare is healthcare. Everybody that is a clinician knows that it is not like sunshine and rainbows 24/7. But if you have a good culture, people looking out for you, and it's the little things, and maybe over time they add up, but you're constantly reminding them about it. I think also people don't put enough time under that to really see it through sometimes. And I think sometimes we jump too early. And I'm guilty of this in my own career. Like I've jumped from jobs that I look back now and I'm like, there was probably still a lot of learning left to do for me there. And I don't regret it, but it makes you wonder, right? Like, would I have gotten that promotion if maybe I had just stuck through some of those challenging times or not just thought about it in a money sense? And I just say that from my own experience too, for maybe some of the newer grads looking.
Yeah. And when you talk about loyalty, the clinicians tend to feel more loyalty to their employers than their employers feel to them. So we get positions and we are immediately emotionally attached to everyone from the front desk person to our patients to our collaborating physician. And it's 2 months or 2 years or 20 years later. And we feel this deep seated loyalty, like I owe them. They've paid me this whole time and they've been so good to me. And I think sometimes that holds us back from pursuing other opportunities. Whereas sometimes that loyalty is not two ways. So if you're in a position where you're loyal to them and they are treating you so incredibly well, amazing, right? However, if you are in a position where you are so incredibly loyal to them and everything you ask for every single time, big or small, and when you raise your hand and say, I have a patient safety concern, I have a concern about this provider's, like you're raising really, important topics and they're ignoring them, that they are not loyal to you in return. It's time to look for a new position there. Don't overestimate their loyalty because they will show you over time whether they value you, whether they're loyal to you by how they answer those questions and how they treat you and other people. And sometimes that's just an important reminder of like, don't be too loyal.
No, no. And I don't say that by any means to say like, if you're not being treated and able to practice at the top of your scope because of lack thereof, like leave. I mean, life is too short. If you're miserable or Monday alarm clock goes off and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like a hamster in a wheel, like then that's not a good sign, right? And I think there's a lot, I know you talk about this when you just look at like the wellness trifecta of it's not just about your pay or your work-life balance. Like, how do you feel? Do you feel present in the other parts of your life? Do you feel like you have time for your like hobbies outside of work? Do you feel like you're there for your family? Like you said, like, is your 3-year-old, 2-year-old saying, Mommy, you're stupid? Like, because those are all indicators of your career health as well. And I think we all get stuck in that rat race at some point, but you also have to be extremely aware of how work is impacting the other parts of your life.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a great reminder. And if this conversation has made you feel like I need a new job, which I know there is someone listening who is like, listen, I need a new job. Right? I knew it before this, but this episode has helped to remind me. Madison, tell us where people can go to find you if they want to use you as a recruiter. Tell us what kind of positions that you can connect them with.
Yeah, definitely. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn is where I'm the most active, but I will send you my website, Tracy, so that you can maybe include that on the show notes. If you are looking and want to send me your CV, you can submit it there on the website. If you just want to reach out to me and connect and you're not looking, but maybe you're looking in the next 6 months to a year, or you're looking for something very specific, feel free to reach out just one-on-one, either email, LinkedIn. We're on all the social platforms. You really can't miss me. I'm doing silly things on TikTok and all the channels. That has been new for me, but we work primarily on PA NPs. We do MDs as well, if you're listening, and also some other positions, but primarily PAs and NPs.
Awesome. Well, Madison, thanks so much for coming on the show. I know that this is going to reach a ton of people.
Awesome. Cool. Hopefully it sheds some insight and helps some people if they are looking for that jump.
I love any conversation that is centered around reminding you that you are worth more and that you are worthy of feeling valued, and for your employer to be loyal and dedicated to you as you are loyal and dedicated to them and the care of your patients. Let this episode be a reminder that you are worth more than you are earning, and that sometimes it's time to make a change. Thank you, as always, for taking time out of what I'm sure is a very busy day for joining us. That's all for now. This PA is out. Congratulations. You've just joined an awesome club. By listening to a full episode of The PA is In, you are officially on the Unicorn PA team. Welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episode of the show. The life of your dreams exists on the other side of taking action. Keep making small shifts and keep getting better. Your life will improve, your career will soar, and you will have the confidence you need to create your own success. I will see you in the next episode. This PA is out.